welcome to Vantage Point. I'm Marcia Boyles, and as always, I'd like to begin by introducing my co-host and co-producer, our clinical social worker at the Medical Center, Kathleen Taylor.
Yeah, thank you.
Good morning. That's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful.
Kathleen, our topic today is the normal aging brain, and let's start by having you introduce our guest.
All right, well, our guest is Heather Shirey. She's one of our speech language pathologists, speech therapists here at Green Spring, and I've known Heather forever, since I've been here forever, but she does a lot of work with cognition in her practice. So she is a real good person for us to bring in today and ask questions of.
We're delighted to have you, Heather, and appreciate your coming today. Maybe it would be a good idea to start by just giving a little bit of background on this particular program. For our last month's program, we focused on the issue of what residents consider to be the major mental health issues that they're facing in aging, living here. And I did a totally informal survey of people I knew, and the answers that came back were almost unanimous, I think, in identifying cognitive issues as being the major concern. So that's the context for this. So we thought we'd begin looking at this issue by talking about the normal aging brain.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when cognition was identified as, or memory loss was identified as a mental health problem, I think probably I would add worry about cognition, because I think that what we're talking about a lot is people worry about worst case scenario. That's our natural human tendencies. And when people don't sort of have a context for, these, loss of words or can't remember names or things like that, then they sort of automatically put themselves out there and go, oh my goodness, is this dementia? And since we do tend to talk about dementia more, even though it's less frequent than just normal aging of the brain, we want to use this show as a way to sort of put all of that into a context of what's normal aging process with our brains. So that's where you come in.
Okay. Well, it's an exciting area to talk about because there's a lot of research out there that relates to cognitive changes as it relates to dementia, but not as much about the normal aged brain and what that looks like. However, there are some aspects that we can discuss that relate to some of the changes we see with the word finding, some of the changes you might see with memory, even language skills that change as we get older. So the good thing is, most of us don't have a lot of change with normal aging. And cognitive changes can start in our mid-20s. So even the younger folk will begin to see a little bit of change as they get older. Isn't that
the 20s?
In the late 20s to early 30s.
They barely have their brain developed when it starts to
deteriorate.
Change, right?
Gosh, that's discouraging.
Kind of when things start to decline a little bit for us.
Is it measurable?
Is it measurable? Every individual is different, so it's a little more difficult to measure what you might expect. But genetics can have an impact on some of that. Your stress levels can have an impact on some of that. Your environmental aspects of where you are, your hearing, your vision, all of those areas can impact. And we'll talk a little bit about each of those today.
Great.
As we discuss.
So as far as those, Marcia, tell the story about the dining room.
Oh, I think all of us experience some changes in aging, and one of them, of course, is loss of words. And so the joke at Green Spring is that it takes a dining table to find a noun. And I think this is not too far-fetched sometimes.
And that's part of the changes that you see with language as the brain ages. You'll notice that there'll be an increase in timing of processing information, and depending on the complexity of what you're communicating, that can impact your word finding. So that can be both when you're communicating verbally as well as when you're writing. So if you find that the information that you're discussing may be a little more complex, then you may notice it takes a little bit more time for that word to come up for you to say. And that's within that normal aged brain function.
Right.
Not uncommon.
And that's why, and sort of, I think the other part of that is that when it starts to take longer to process information, people start to get stressed and get anxious. And that actually exacerbates that process.
Exactly.
Because the more tense you are, the less able you are to retrieve that information. So it's kind of, a little bit of a multi-level problem to a certain extent. So that's part of our message here today too, is if people can sort of get to the point where they sort of go, like your dining group, kind of just laugh about it and say, it's a joke, kind of, because it's the reality of the situation, that they can accept these normal changes as part of who they are and not create more stressors for themselves as well.
Yes, I think that's a good point, because it is a stressor. I think one of the things that also happens to everybody really is not being able to remember people's names. And I mean, they could be good friends and you sometimes blank on their names, which is stressful and kind of embarrassing, if truth be told. But I mean, we do have to laugh about it, because it's true of almost everybody.
Because everybody's sort of basically sharing the same experience at this
They are,
point, right?
absolutely they are. And that's a good point.
Right. So with memory, our long-term memories, our activities and things that we've done in the past will usually remain intact for the long term. It's those short-term memories and that processing speed again that impact those new activities or things, words, names that we're learning. So again, it's not uncommon when you're maybe learning a new person's name and some basic information about them to not remember that initially as you get older. It's if you're consistently forgetting that information that we would need to be concerned. But it's normal to not have some of those short-term memories of new names. That's not uncommon.
All right, I think that's reassuring.
What about, I think I had read something about that, as your processing speed kind of increases, that environmental distractions can also play into that. So in the dining room, for example, with a lot of noise and a lot of different things going on,
Right.
that might become more difficult than being, one-on-one in your apartment or something like that. Is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So as we get older, our hearing and vision start to change. So those are some physiological changes that we can't control. And in some instances, it's more that than the cognitive piece that's changing. Whereas if we can't see as well, if we don't have good lighting, if we don't have good surroundings to absorb sound for us, like in a dining room where maybe there's no carpeting or no curtains, those type of things actually impact us more than what's really happening cognitively.
I think one of the things we all notice is distractibility, that we multitask far less effectively than we used to. We just get sidetracked more easily.
Yeah. And you had said that was part of the change, too, the inability to kind of screen out all of those distractions
Right.
or filter them.
Right. So through research, sustained attention, or that ability to just focus on one thing, does not really change much as we age. It's more that ability to divide your attention that you're talking about,
Yes.
and the multitasking that becomes a challenge. And that, again, is just part of normal aging.
All right.
So that's a good thing, too.
Well, yeah, that's right. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I think that is reassuring. One of the issues at Green Spring is noise, particularly in the hallways, especially, of course, for folks that are on main corridors. And I think it is more distracting. I mean, I find it at least more distracting than I would ever have found it in the past. If I'm focused on something and there's, you know, they're picking up the garbage and shouting at each other and things of that sort, I just find it just makes me crazy. And I don't think I ever would have thought that before. So yes, I think things like that really become an irritant or a distraction to a much greater degree.
Yeah, and I think, again, I would just go back again to the fact that, you know, if people, how you're interpreting that change, you know, if you're getting frustrated and you're going, what's wrong with me? I used to be able to do all of this stuff, you know, that actually adds to the problem as well.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I think, you know, the message is that, you know, you need to kind of just accept, again, these changes and not, you know, think I have to do this perfectly, because, you know, you're not going to be, I mean, nobody was ever perfect, but you forget that too. That, you know, well, I used to be able to, you know, do all of these things at one time. Yeah, maybe you did, but maybe you weren't that good at it either. I mean, it's like multitasking has never been that effective for people.
No, that's right.
But again, to just kind of, people tend to compare themselves to their memory of what they used to be able to do. So, I mean, again, it's just really part of how people are reacting to these changes.
So what you're saying is that the things we've been doing all of our lives are ingrained, and those don't change, but it's the things that we've learned more recently, and the things and the names and the people and things of that sort that we're more likely to lose quickly.
Exactly, exactly. So as
Okay.
the brain changes, that deep matter, that gray matter, begins to stay fairly intact, but it's that white matter that starts to change more as we get older, and that's where those short-term memories come in.
Okay.
So when we talk a little bit about intelligence, as you were mentioning earlier, those aspects of our general intelligence will remain, and that's actually a cognitive reserve for us.
Right.
When you have good education and you've worked hard and, you know, learning and processing information, new information, it's that what we call fluid intellect that is a little bit harder to retain. So when you go to a class here and you're learning new information, that piece is going to be a little bit harder versus things that you've learned and you've done in your work life that will continue to stay ingrained in your mind.
All right. The next obvious question is, can you help our white matter?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's encouraging. Tell us how.
Sure. So for those individuals that are seeing some normal age changes and you want that wellness aspect, we have several things that we can do here at Green Spring. The memory support programming that we have allows for the memory fitness activities that are offered in independent living. One of those is the memory fitness classes that they offer twice a year. The brain train that they offer with
Twice a year too.
Twice a year. Twice, is it cyclic in a sense?
Yeah, I think it's like spring and fall, but sort of they're opposite each other. So you have something to do a lot of the time in terms of that stimulation and kind of exercising your brain as well as your body.
As well
Now,
as your
does
body.
does one have to be mobile to do that?
The brain train, they are able to do like a chair level of the exercises as well. So
Oh, they are.
yeah, so we advertise those pretty well. I think they continue to be very popular. And the memory fitness classes, of course, have been going on for a really long time, but people can take them more than one time too. I think we need to say that if you want to, you know, you did one a couple years ago and you want to do it again. So talk a little bit about what strategies are offered in the memory fitness.
Memory fitness?
Yeah.
Oh, there's some interesting ones there. The one I remember the most is the snap, what is it, snap and look, take a mental picture. I'm trying to remember the whole acronym for that one. They also talk a little bit about using a story to help you remember a list of words. It's another aspect of what they teach in the memory fitness as well. Of course, note-taking is always good if you're starting to notice some short-term memory deficits, to keep just a little notebook in your pocket and a pen so that you can make some notations while you're thinking about it versus trying to task your memory into recalling it later is another good one. any type of mental exercise that you can do. Puzzles, getting on the computer if you like to do applications on your iPad. There's several out there that you can utilize for daily mental exercise.
Right.
So there's a slew of things.
Are there apps, say for the iPad, that actually do puzzles or things of that sort? Oh, there are. Okay.
Yeah, there's so many things.
Now, you would be able to show folks how to do that? Okay, well,
Absolutely.
that's news. I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. And we have a mind benders group that meets once a month as well, and that kind of combines people getting together, so it's the socialization aspect, which is also good for cognition, right?
Right.
And then also they do all different kinds of puzzles and things, fun problem solving things as a group. So, and you know, the puzzles out in the lobbies, you know, people kind of do those as a group, which is kind of a cool thing too. So there's, and of course exercise is also good for brain health. So
Practically everybody I know does crossword puzzles, and there's huge conversation between folks virtually every day about the crossword puzzle.
Yeah.
That seems to be a common practice among residents.
yeah, yeah, a lot of people do those. But yeah, so pretty much anything, and I mean, to the point of what Green Spring offers, all of the different clubs, dancing, right? You know, learning to dance, you know, learning anything
Right.
is really, really helpful to provide that stimulation. So there's a lot that people can do if they're starting to worry, other than worry. Don't worry. Worry is not helpful. But get out, you know, I think learning something new or
Absolutely.
trying something different is really, again, you know, multi-level, has a positive effect in terms of sort of getting you out and helping you feel more engaged, probably going to get you more social, and then also activating new synapses in your brain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I've heard you say now a couple of times that socialization was an important component of this. Talk a little bit about that. I'm thinking, for example, the social isolation that ensued as a result of the epidemic that we had recently. People talked about being kind of depressed and worried and concerned. And I'm wondering if you saw any impact of that.
Well, I mean, I know I did, absolutely. And I mean, I think that we can talk about this more later, but that was a stressor for people. And as a result, excuse me, what we know about stress is that it can impact you cognitively too. You kind of lose focus, you lose the ability to concentrate, kind of are not as observant as you usually are. And I think that, you know, the fact that you're kind of keeping to yourself because we had that restriction, that really your skill set probably deteriorated a little bit in terms of maybe you're not talking to people as much, maybe you're not interacting as much. All of that, I mean, this cognition is definitely something that, you know, to a certain extent you use it or you lose it, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's important that you spend time either communicating on the phone with someone each day, staying connected to individuals. If you're able to use FaceTime on your iPad or on your iPhone, staying connected with your family that way. So there's so many different ways that we can stay connected. You know, just go next door, knock on your neighbor's door and spend a couple minutes talking with them. Sometimes we have to come out of our shell and just do it, instead of waiting for somebody to come to us. So finding things you like to do. You know, taking the time to do something that you really enjoy and get involved in activities where there's others that enjoy what you enjoy to keep your brain stimulated is important.
Yeah, I think people did begin to see true effects of that. It was an interesting experiment from that standpoint.
Yeah, it's weird that you think, when you think about it, but if you don't talk to people, you know, on a daily basis, like Heather said, you sort of, it's hard to get started again, you know? So it's that practice.
Yeah, and I do think there was a certain level of depression that began to set in.
Yeah, but what I would say is, yeah, if you are isolating yourself and you're not engaging in your life, then sure, you're going to feel very sad. Social isolation is really, really, something that can affect you very much emotionally. So that part, and that's going to affect you cognitively. I mean,
Right.
interestingly enough, what we know is that depression and stress can look like dementia. It can present as dementia. You've heard me talk about pseudo-dementia before.
Yes.
Where the people come in with all of the symptoms, or many of the symptoms of true dementia. And then when you start to do take a history, what you determine is there's either stress overload or, a true clinical depression that is impacting their behaviors.
All right, I think that's fairly critical information. Kathleen, talk a little bit more about the kinds of situations that you're seeing that, in which you're seeing that.
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's just, over time, if people are not staying stimulated and not engaging, then they do tend to lose the skills, that they need to be able to have to be cognitively involved in life. But stress definitely can actually affect your brain, which is, I think, the thing that's really, I mean, this blows me away, but stress overload creates kind of a continuous sense of being in that fight or flight situation. And when your body is reacting to a threat, it switches from the front of your brain, your prefrontal cortex, which is where all of your executive functioning and analytical thinking is, to the back of your brain, which is basically your autonomic nervous system. You're just reacting to stimuli at that point. You're not thinking things through. So as a result, you're not I think this is interesting, is when you're in that mode, you're not paying attention to your environment. So when people say, I can't remember things, it's because they never put the information into their brain to begin with when they're in the stress mode or in a depressed situation where they're not paying attention. They're so focused on, sort of internally focused on this perception of threat or danger, that that's all they're paying attention to. It's crazy. Yeah. But anyhow, the way that we treat that is we treat the depression, or we treat the stress. And then what will happen with this...
Now, what do you mean by treat?
Well, usually you can do therapy with people to help them understand, how they're reacting. You can teach them different methods to help them to be able to respond more constructively to their stress. Medication sometimes, if anxiety is playing a big part. But the main thing is you can treat it in the sense that when you are resolving these kinds of problems, that the person's cognition will return to more of a normal baseline for them.
All right, well, I can certainly think of some very common kinds of stressors in aging situations. Certainly folks with spouses for whom they are caregivers, in effect, I think often creates isolation. If you've got a spouse you have to stay with 24 hours a day or just about, it can be a terrible stress.
Yeah.
And health issues, clearly limitations of vision and hearing certainly cause isolation.
Absolutely.
So I think, we are faced with probably a new package of stressors that we have not experienced before. What you're saying is that those stressors in themselves can create cognitive issues.
Yeah, cognitive interference, right?
Cognitive interference.
Yeah,
okay.
that it interferes with your brain's ability to take in information and process it.
Absolutely. And I think that now's a good time to talk about hearing loss a little bit. For those that maybe are not aided with a hearing aid, but you know that you've got some hearing loss, to seriously consider some of the options that are out there to help you with hearing, because that in itself will isolate you from communications.
Oh, absolutely.
And also with your vision.
Right.
If you're noticing some changes in your vision, to make sure that your doctor's aware of that and you have that checked out too.
Yes.
So that you can be
both
fully
are certainly
engaged.
isolating. There's no getting around it.
Right.
Which also brings us to another point, because you mentioned doctors, is that people are, like I said, worried about what's happening as they get older, certainly cognitively, physically. Maybe they're going online. We talk about Dr. Google, you know, kind of going online and sort of diagnosing themselves. But what Heather and I definitely want to say is, don't sit there in isolation and worry that horrible things are happening. Go to a professional. Get checked out by your doctor. You know, come see Heather. Come see me. You know, whoever you feel like you need to, but talk to a professional, and the professional will be able to give you a context, and we'll be able to tell you a little bit more specifically, should you worry or should you not worry, really. And most often, the answer is, don't worry.
All right, now for both of you, is a physician's referral required?
For Heather, yes.
For me, definitely. For me, definitely. And our outpatient services, as soon as we have a referral, we schedule an assessment, and I can do a full battery of tools to assess the different levels of language and cognition, and kind of determine if there's any specific personalized things that I can support someone in, as well as doing education with caretakers. So it's not just that one-on-one time that I spend, but time together with spouses and caretakers as part of that personalized plan that we do. So for me, yes.
So you're looking at the whole person with
Absolutely.
the entire situation,
Absolutely.
living situation,
Absolutely.
right?
And
Kathleen?
it would be okay if somebody was just worried. They could go to their physician and say, I'm just worried, but I'd like to have this battery of tests just to sort of see where I'm at.
Absolutely.
And that would be okay.
Yes.
And it wouldn't, if it turned out to be completely okay, that would be okay too, right?
That would be wonderful.
That would be wonderful.
That would be
yes.
wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm here as a resource.
That's right. That's right.
That's a terrific resource.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Kathleen, what about you? Are your services primarily by referral?
Yeah, I don't need a doctor's order, so if somebody can self-refer if they want to call the medical center and ask for a mental health consultation, either from myself or from Pat Ferrari, who's our other mental health practitioner in the medical center.
Now, do you also do a battery of comprehensive tests initially, as Heather does?
Not necessarily. It really depends on what the presentation is. You know, we do talk therapy, so we're going to be just involved in more, again, what I was talking about, and looking at how the person is responding to the situation. But if the person comes to me first and there are indications that memory loss actually is playing a part, then I would make a referral to the physician and to Heather. So we're a team.
Okay.
And so we really definitely involve everybody as appropriate.
All right. Well, that certainly makes sense. Again, this is a wonderful source of help here.
Yeah.
And I think it really is very, very helpful for folks, all of us, to understand that there are times when, because we are under stress, that it is going to have an impact, and it may not be permanent, on our cognitive abilities.
Yeah. So basically, if you're worried, then just seek out people that will help you understand better what's going on with you. And they are waving at us that it's time to end.
I see that they are.